The mirror in the grand hallway of the Whitmore estate didn't lie, but it held secrets sharper than any blade. Ethan, barely 20, stared into it, his reflection trembling as he traced the outline of his own face-green eyes. Sharp jaw, a stranger's features in a house that wasn't his. Behind him, the boy he loved, Caleb Whitmore, heir to a fortune, stood frozen, their forbidden truth about to unravel. It was supposed to be a quiet summer in Greenwich, Connecticut, when Ethan arrived at the Whitmore mansion. Adopted just weeks ago by Richard and Eleanor Whitmore, he'd been plucked from a foster home in Boston, a scrappy kid with no past and a guarded heart. The Whitmores were old money polished, poised, and generous to a fault. They'd offered him a new life, a bedroom bigger than any apartment he'd ever known, and a chance to start over. But Ethan hadn't come for their charity. He'd come for Caleb. Caleb, with his tousled blonde hair and reckless smile, had been Ethan's world for 2 years, a secret born in stolen moments at a community college in Boston. They'd met in a literature class, arguing over Whitman's poetry until their debates turned to whispers, then kisses in the shadows of the library stacks. Caleb was everything Ethan wasn't: privileged, confident, untouchable. Yet, they fit, like two halves of a broken locket. Their love a quiet rebellion against a world that didn't always understand. But Caleb had never told his parents. The Whitmores were traditionalists, their Greenwich estate a shrine to legacy and expectation. Caleb swore he'd tell them one day, but one day never came. Instead, when the Whitmores decided to adopt, Caleb saw a chance, a reckless, dangerous chancito bring Ethan closer. He'd suggested Ethan's name to the adoption agency, pulling strings through a family friend. Ethan, desperate to escape the foster system and be near Caleb, agreed. It was a plan stitched together with hope and naivety, a house of cards waiting for a gust. Now, standing in the Whitmores' marble foyer, Ethan felt the weight of their lie. The adoption papers were signed, the family portrait scheduled, but every glance in Caleb's direction was a risk. They'd promised to be careful, no touches, no lingering looks, but love was a terrible liar. That morning, Caleb had brushed Ethan's hand under the breakfast table, a fleeting touch that sent Ethan's heart racing. Eleanor had noticed, her brow furrowing, but she'd said nothing. Not yet. The mirror reflected more than their faces. It held the tension of a truth unspoken. Ethan had overheard Richard and Eleanor talking late at night, their voices low and troubled. He looked so familiar, Eleanor had murmured. Like someone we've seen before. Ethan's stomach had twisted. He didn't know his own parents' birth records were dead, but the Whitmores' words gnawed at him. What if they recognized him? Not as their adopted son, but as the boy their son loved. Caleb stepped closer now, his reflection joining Ethan's in the mirror. "We can't keep doing this," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the chandelier above. "They're going to figure it out." "They won't," Caleb said, but his tone lacked conviction. His hand hovered near Ethan's shoulder, aching to touch but restrained by the weight of the house around them. "We just need time." "Time for what?" Ethan turned, his green eyes blazing. "For them to love me as their son before they hate me as your boyfriend." Caleb flinched, but he didn't back away. "They'll understand. They have to." Ethan wanted to believe him, but doubt was a splinter under his skin. He'd spent his life being invisible, shuffled through foster homes, forgotten by a system that didn't care. Caleb was the first person who'd seen him, really seen him, and now they were gambling everything on a lie. If the Whitmores found out, Ethan could lose not just Caleb, but the family he'd barely begun to know. That evening, at a charity gala in the Whitmores' sprawling backyard, the tension simmered. Greenwich's elite sipped champagne under twinkling lights, their laughter a stark contrast to Ethan's racing pulse. He stood by the rose garden, watching Caleb charm the guests, his tailored suit hugging his frame. Ethan felt out of place in his borrowed blazer, the weight of his secret pressing against his ribs. Eleanor approached, her silver gown catching the moonlight. "Ethan, you're awfully quiet," she said, her smile warm but searching. "Are you settling in?" He nodded, forcing a smile. "It's a lot to take in. I'm grateful, though." She studied him, her eyes lingering on his face. "You remind me of someone," she said softly, almost to herself. "It's strange, isn't it? How fate brings people together." Ethan's throat tightened. He glanced at Caleb, who was watching from across the lawn, his expression unreadable. Fate, Ethan thought, or a reckless plan that could ruin them all. As the night wore on, Caleb pulled Ethan aside, leading him to a quiet corner of the garden. Under the cover of a willow tree, Caleb's hand found Ethan's, their fingers intertwining. "I hate this," Caleb whispered, "pretending you're just my brother." "Then stop pretending," Ethan said, his voice raw. "Tell them." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You know I can't. Not yet. My father, he's not ready." "And I am." Ethan pulled his hand away. "I'm living a lie, Caleb. For you." Caleb's eyes glistened. But before he could respond, a voice cut through the darkness. "Boys." Richard Whitmore stood at the edge of the garden, his silhouette imposing. "What's going on out here?" Ethan's heart stopped. The mirror had warned them, but the truth was closing in. Richard's voice was a thunderclap in the quiet garden, and Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. He stepped back from Caleb, his hands still warm from their fleeting touch, but the distance felt like a chasm. Richard's eyes narrowed, scanning the space between them, suspicion etching lines into his weathered face. "Nothing's going on," Caleb said quickly, his voice steady but too polished, like a rehearsed line. "Just showing Ethan the garden." Richard didn't move, his gaze shifting to Ethan. "You're part of this family now, Ethan. No need to hide in the shadows." His tone was kind, but there was an edge to it, a question unspoken. Ethan nodded, his throat dry. "Yes, sir. Just getting some air." Richard lingered a moment longer, then turned back toward the gala, his footsteps crunching on the gravel path. Ethan exhaled, but the relief was fleeting. Caleb grabbed his arm, pulling him deeper into the garden's shadows. "We need to be more careful," Caleb whispered, his voice urgent. "He's watching us." "He's your father," Ethan snapped, his fear morphing into frustration. "Why is he looking at me like I'm a thief?" Caleb's face softened. "Because he doesn't know you. Not like I do." The words should have soothed Ethan, but they only tightened the knot in his chest. He wasn't just hiding his love for Caleb. He was hiding himself, molding his edges to fit the Whitmore's perfect world. He'd spent his life adapting new foster homes, new rules, new faces, but this was different. This was a betrayal of the only truth that had ever felt real. The next morning, the Whitmore estate buzzed with preparations for a family portrait. Eleanor insisted it was a tradition, a way to mark Ethan's place in their lives. The photographer arrived with an arsenal of lights and lenses, setting up in the sunlit conservatory. Ethan stood stiffly in a tailored suit, feeling like an imposter as Eleanor adjusted his tie with maternal care. "You look handsome," she said, her smile genuine. "Like you've always belonged here." Ethan forced a smile, but his eyes darted to Caleb, who stood nearby, fidgeting with his cufflinks. The photographer positioned them side by side, their shoulders brushing. "Closer," the photographer instructed, oblivious to the electric current that sparked between them. Ethan's heart raced, and he prayed the camera wouldn't capture the longing in his gaze. As the shutter clicked, Eleanor's phone rang. She excused herself, her expression shifting as she listened to the caller. When she returned, her face was pale. "That was the adoption agency," she said, her voice tight. "They found something in Ethan's file. A discrepancy." Ethan's stomach dropped. Caleb's hand twitched, as if to reach for him. But he stopped himself. Richard frowned. What kind of discrepancy? They're not sure, Eleanor said, glancing at Ethan. Something about his birth records. They want to meet with us tomorrow. The room felt smaller, the air thinner. Ethan's mind raced. His birth records were a blank slate. Foster care had erased any trace of his origins. But the Whitmore's scrutiny was relentless, and he feared what they might uncover. Not just his love for Caleb, but something deeper, something tied to the way Eleanor kept saying he looked familiar. That night, unable to sleep, Ethan slipped into the library, where Caleb found him. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp, casting long shadows across the bookshelves. What if they know? Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. What if they figure out why I'm really here? Caleb knelt beside him, his hand resting on Ethan's knee. They won't. We'll figure this out. Together. But Ethan wasn't so sure. The mirror in the hallway had shown him a truth he couldn't ignore. He was an outsider in a house built on secrets. And secrets, he knew, had a way of breaking free. The meeting with the adoption agency loomed like a storm cloud. When the day arrived, Ethan sat in the Whitmore's sleek SUV, Caleb beside him, their knees brushing in the back seat. Richard drove, his silence heavy, while Eleanor clutched a folder of documents. The agency's office in Hartford was sterile, all glass and chrome, a stark contrast to the warmth of the Whitmore estate. The caseworker, a woman with sharp eyes and a clipped tone, spread Ethan's file across the table. There's a gap in your records, she said, addressing Ethan directly. Your birth certificate lists a hospital in Boston, but the records don't match any known patient. It's as if you appeared out of nowhere. Ethan's heart pounded. He'd always known his past was a mystery, but hearing it laid bare felt like a judgment. Caleb's hand grazed his under the table, a silent anchor, but it wasn't enough to stop the room from spinning. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice steady but laced with something Ethan couldn't place hope. Maybe, or fear. Could there be a mistake? Could he be connected to someone we know? The caseworker frowned. It's possible. We're running a DNA test to confirm. We should have results in a few days. Ethan's world tilted. A DNA test. The truth was no longer a choice, it was a ticking clock. He glanced at Caleb, whose face was a mask of calm, but his eyes betrayed his panic. They'd built their love on borrowed time, and now time was running out. As they left the office, Richard's hand landed heavily on Ethan's shoulder. Whatever happens, he said, his voice low, you're part of this family now. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the family he'd found was about to shatter. The Whitmore estate felt like a house holding its breath. Ethan barely slept, haunted by the caseworker's words and the looming DNA test. Every creak of the old mansion seemed to whisper accusations, and the mirror in the hallway mocked him with his own reflection, a boy who didn't belong. Caleb tried to keep things light, sneaking moments with Ethan in the attic or the garage, where they could steal a kiss without fear of being seen. But even those moments were tainted by the weight of what was coming. What if the test shows nothing? Caleb asked one night, his voice muffled against Ethan's shoulder as they sat on the attic floor, surrounded by dusty trunks. What if you're just you? Then we still have to tell them, Ethan said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. I can't keep pretending to be their son when I'm in love with you. Caleb pulled back, his blue eyes searching Ethan's face. I'm scared, he admitted, the words raw. I've never stood up to them. Not like this. Ethan cupped Caleb's face, his thumb brushing his cheek. You don't have to do it alone. But alone was exactly how Ethan felt the next day when Eleanor called him into her study. The room was lined with family photos, generations of Whitmores staring down from gilded frames. Eleanor sat at her desk, a small box in front of her. I found something, she said, her voice soft but unsteady. In storage. She opened the box, revealing a stack of old photos. The top one showed a young boy, maybe 4 years old, with green eyes and a shy smile. Ethan's breath caught. The boy looked like him uncannily so. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Eleanor's eyes glistened. "It's complicated. We had a friend years ago, a woman who lived nearby. She had a son. He disappeared when he was young, and we never knew what happened. When I saw you, Ethan, I thought." She trailed off, her hand trembling as she touched the photo. Ethan's mind reeled. Was this why he looked familiar to her? Was he that boy? Or was this just another cruel twist of fate? He wanted to ask, but fear choked the words. Instead, he said, "I don't know who I am. Eleanor. I never have." She reached for his hand, her touch warm but heavy with unspoken questions. "We'll find out soon," she said. "The DNA results are coming tomorrow." That night, Ethan couldn't face Caleb. He wandered the estate's grounds, the moonlight casting long shadows across the lawn. He felt like a ghost, haunting a life that wasn't his. When Caleb found him by the pond, his face was etched with worry. "You're shutting me out," Caleb said, his voice breaking. "Don't do this." "I'm trying to protect you," Ethan said, his voice raw. "If they find out about us before the test, it'll be worse. They'll think I manipulated you, that I used you to get here." Caleb grabbed his shoulders, his grip fierce. "I don't care what they think. I love you, Ethan. That's the only truth that matters." Ethan's resolve cracked, and he pulled Caleb into a desperate kiss, the kind that felt like a goodbye. The pond reflected their embrace, a fleeting moment of truth in a world built on lies. The next morning, the DNA results arrived. The family gathered in the living room, the air thick with tension. Richard opened the envelope, his face unreadable as he scanned the page. "It's inconclusive," he said finally, his voice flat. "The records are too incomplete to confirm anything." Eleanor's face fell, but Ethan felt a strange relief. Inconclusive meant time to decide how to tell the truth. But Caleb's expression was stormy. "This is ridiculous," he said, standing abruptly. "We're tearing ourselves apart over nothing." "Caleb," Richard warned. But Caleb was already moving toward Ethan. "No," Caleb said, his voice shaking but resolute. "I'm done hiding." He turned to his parents, his hands clenched. "Ethan's not just your adopted son. He's my boyfriend. We've been together for 2 years." The room went silent, the kind of silence that swallows sound and time. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, and Richard's face darkened. Ethan's heart pounded, but he stepped forward, standing beside Caleb. "It's true," he said, his voice steady despite the fear. "I love him." The mirror had warned them, but the truth was out, and there was no going back. The silence in the Whitmore living room was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Caleb's words hung in the air, each syllable a stone dropped into still water, rippling through the family's carefully curated world. Ethan stood beside him, his heart a drumbeat, waiting for the fallout. Eleanor was the first to speak, her voice trembling. "Caleb, what are you saying? This can't be true." "It is," Caleb said, his jaw set. "I love Ethan. I've always loved him. The adoption it was my idea. I wanted him here, with me." Richard's face was a storm cloud, his eyes narrowing as they fixed on Ethan. "You knew about this?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You came into our home, accepted our name, all while lying to us." Ethan's throat tightened, but he met Richard's gaze. "I didn't want to lie. I love Caleb, and I thought I could be part of this family, too." "Part of this family." Richard's voice rose, sharp and cutting. "You manipulated us. You used our generosity, Stop it, Caleb snapped, stepping between Ethan and his father. This isn't Ethan's fault. It's mine. I pushed him into this. I was too scared to tell you the truth. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, her hands twisting in her lap. Why didn't you tell us? Caleb, we've always loved you. We would have listened. Would you? Caleb's voice cracked, raw with years of unspoken pain. You talk about legacy, about tradition. You've never once asked me who I am, what I want. I was afraid you'd reject me. The words landed like a blow, and Eleanor flinched. Richard's anger faltered, replaced by something softer, something wounded. Ethan wanted to reach for Caleb, to anchor him, but he stood frozen, an outsider in a family unraveling. I need time, Eleanor said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. She stood and left the room, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Richard followed, casting one last look at Ethan, a look that held neither warmth nor forgiveness. The days that followed were a tightrope. Eleanor and Richard barely spoke to Ethan, their interactions polite but distant. Caleb was defiant, refusing to let Ethan face the fallout alone, but the strain was visible in his eyes. They stole moments in the garden or the attic, but each touch felt borrowed, each kiss a defiance against the inevitable. One evening, Ethan found Eleanor in the kitchen, staring at the old photo of the boy who looked like him. She didn't notice him at first, lost in thought. Eleanor, he said softly, and she startled, her eyes meeting his. I keep thinking about him, she said, her voice fragile. The boy we knew. His mother was our friend, and when they disappeared, it broke us. When I saw you, I thought maybe you were him. Ethan's heart ached. I wish I had answers, he said, but I don't. All I know is that I love Caleb, and I never meant to hurt you. Eleanor's eyes softened, but the pain remained. I believe you, she said, but it's a lot to carry. The next morning, Richard called a family meeting. Ethan braced himself, expecting an ultimatum, but Richard's tone was different, calmer, almost resigned. We've decided to hire a private investigator, he said, to look into Ethan's past. Not to punish you, he added, glancing at Ethan, but to understand. Caleb's hand found Ethan's under the table. A silent vow. Ethan nodded, his voice steady. I want to know, too. The investigator's report came faster than expected. It arrived on a rainy afternoon, a thick envelope that Richard opened with trembling hands. The room was silent as he read, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. Ethan, he said finally, his voice hoarse. Your mother, she was our friend, the one who disappeared. Eleanor gasped, her hand covering her mouth. Caleb's grip on Ethan's hand tightened. What does that mean? Caleb asked, his voice urgent. It means, Richard said, his eyes locked on Ethan, that you're not just our adopted son. You're the boy we thought we'd lost. The revelation hit Ethan like a tidal wave. He wasn't just Caleb's boyfriend who was tied to the Whitmores by a past he couldn't remember. The mirror had shown him a stranger, but now it reflected a truth he wasn't ready to face. The revelation hung in the air like a storm that hadn't yet broken. Ethan sat frozen, the investigator's report a weight he couldn't lift. He was the boy from Eleanor's photo, the son of their long-lost friend, a piece of their past they'd mourned for years. But he was also Caleb's boyfriend, a secret that had fractured the family he'd unknowingly belonged to. Eleanor's eyes were wet with tears, but her voice was steady. Your mother, Anna, was like a sister to me, she said, her gaze locked on Ethan. When she vanished with you, we searched for years. We thought you were gone forever. Ethan's mind spun, fragments of a life he didn't remember clawing at the edges of his consciousness. I don't remember her, he said, his voice breaking. I don't remember anything before foster care. Caleb's hand was still in his, an anchor in the chaos. But you're here now, Caleb said, his voice fierce. You're with us. With me. Richard's face was unreadable, a mix of grief and resolve. This changes things, he said, but it doesn't erase what you've done. The lies. Richard, Eleanor said sharply, her tone a warning. They're young. They were scared. Scared. Richard's voice rose, but there was no anger in it, only pain. We opened our home, our hearts, and they built it on a lie. Ethan stood, his chair scraping against the floor. I'm sorry, he said, his voice raw. I never meant to hurt you. I love Caleb, and I thought I could belong here without breaking anything. Caleb stood beside him, his shoulders squared. If you can't accept us, then we'll leave, he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. But I'm not letting go of him. The words were a line in the sand, and the room fell silent. Eleanor reached for Richard's hand, her eyes pleading. They love each other, she said softly. And Ethan, he's Anna's son. He's family. Richard's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken truths, until he finally stood and left the room. Ethan's heart sank, but Eleanor's hand found his, her touch warm and steady. Give him time, she said. He's grieving, too. The days that followed were a delicate dance. Richard kept his distance, but Eleanor threw herself into uncovering Ethan's past, digging through old letters and photos, piecing together the life he'd lost. She told him stories of his mother, her laugh, her love for painting, the way she dreamed of a better life for her son. Each story was a thread, weaving Ethan into the fabric of a family he'd never known. Caleb and Ethan grew bolder, no longer hiding their affection. They held hands at dinner, shared quiet moments in the garden, their love a quiet defiance. Eleanor watched them with a mix of joy and sorrow, her heart torn between the son she'd gained and the friend she'd lost. One evening, Richard found Ethan in the library, staring at a photo of his mother. She was special, Richard said, his voice gruff but softer than before. And so are you. Ethan looked up, surprised. I didn't mean to cause all this, he said. I just wanted to be with Caleb. Richard nodded, his eyes distant. I was wrong to judge you. I see how you look at him, how he looks at you. It's real. The words were a balm, healing wounds Ethan hadn't realized he carried. He nodded, unable to speak, and Richard placed a hand on his Shadera gesture of acceptance. Hard one, but genuine. The Whitmores held a small ceremony in the garden to honor Ethan's mother, a way to welcome him fully into their lives. Under the cherry blossom tree, where Ethan and Caleb had shared their first stolen moment, they scattered petals in her memory. Caleb's hand was warm in Ethan's, their fingers intertwined, no longer a secret. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the garden, Ethan looked into the mirror of his own heart. He saw not just the boy he'd been lost, alone, searching, but the man he'd become, loved and found. The Whitmores weren't perfect, but they were his family, bound not just by blood or adoption, but by a love that had weathered lies and truths alike. Caleb leaned in, his lips brushing Ethan's ear. We made it, he whispered. Ethan smiled, his heart full. Yeah, he said. We did. The mirror had revealed their secret, but it also showed them a future together, unhidden and whole.